My name is Trude McMahon, and I am almost 67 years old. So I grew up in the 1960s and was active in the women's movement. I was educated at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I taught for a while, and then I joined the Army, and I spent 3 years in the Army. I've been married 3 times. My first husband is now a judge in Reno, and my second husband is an aircraft mechanic. He and I went in the Army together, and when we came out, I decided to go to law school, and I became a tax attorney. And I moved to Las Vegas, where I got my first job, and practiced law, primarily estate planning and some corporate work, and then ultimately elder law. So many of my clients are caretakers for spouses or guardians of family members. That's what I did for a living. And I learned a lot of things. I learned, and if any of you in this room don't know it, Alzheimer's is not the only kind of dementia. And I joined an organization called Seroptimist International, and we have been active in Las Vegas. One of our members was one of the founders of our local domestic violence shelter, and one of our members, both of these women are now deceased, was one of the founders of our local rape crisis center, Florence McClure. And the women's prison in Nevada is named after Florence. So we have a long, proud history in Nevada of working for social justice issues, primarily for women and girls. I met my husband, my current husband. I had been divorced a couple of years in 1988. His name is Tom Ferguson. He is a jazz pianist. He has a PhD in music theory from the Eastman School of Music. He is a very accomplished musician. He's traveled all over the world. He's played for Frank Sinatra, for Bob Hope, for Keely Smith, all over. He ran the jazz program at the University of Memphis for a number of years, then taught at Arizona State, came to Las Vegas as a professional musician, and then joined the faculty at the community college. One of my best friends introduced us in 1988, and we started seeing each other in 1989. Now, Tom is 14 years older than I am. He turned 80 last summer, and in June he will be 81. We finally got married after 14 years in 2003, and we bought a house together. And he retired from the community college in 2008, but he was still playing. I never spent a New Year's Eve with Tom because he always had a gig. I was fortunate because I was able to meet people like Tony Bennett and Joe Williams and Marlena Shaw and jazz greats all over the country, because he had been on the Jazz Grants panel for the National Endowment for the Arts. He had been the president of the International Association of Jazz Education. He was very accomplished. In fact, his daughter, Sherry, is the children's music director at Paradise Valley United Methodist Church. She's a violinist. And his younger daughter's a violinist. After Tom retired, we started seeing signs of memory loss. Not significant, but his short-term memory was getting a little bad. And he was being seen by a neurologist who did an MRI and determined that he had had at least one mild stroke and several TIAs. And as most musicians did during the time Tom was growing up, he drank, he smoked, he did drugs, he caroused, he had affairs as a young man. He was not a nice person, according to some people who knew him, and he had a temper. In late 2009, he had some tests done, and it was determined that his right carotid artery was over 70% blocked. And so the doctor recommended that he have a carotid endarterectomy, and told us that if he did not have the procedure, there was a 25 to 40% chance that he would have a massive stroke. But if he had the procedure, there was a 2% chance that he would have a stroke as a result of the procedure. Tom went in the hospital on a Monday in January of 2010. On Tuesday, he had a very mild heart attack. His cardiologist came in, we did tests. Alan said, it's not in a place we have to do anything about, he'll be fine tomorrow. During the night, he was in ICU. I had let them put him on a vent because he was having trouble breathing. He had a stroke. And the staff in the hospital didn't notice it because he was on a ventilator in ICU. By the time we realized it, it was Friday night. He had had the stroke sometime during the night on Thursday night. And he was in ICU for 12 days. He was in acute rehab. He went from acute rehab to subacute rehab. He went from subacute rehab to a geriatric psych unit because he hit one of the therapists. It took me 2 weeks to get him out of the geriatric psych unit because the doctor was, quite frankly, a jerk, and he wouldn't talk to me. It took me 2 weeks to get to the head of the hospital, and I got a phone call from the doctor. And then we had to lie to get him out because they weren't going to release him. They had had him sign voluntary commitment paperwork. So our cardiologist, who's a personal friend, when I talked to him, said, he's having chest pains, isn't he? I said, I don't know. Alan said, he's having chest pains, isn't he? And I said, of course he's having chest pains, and the hospital he was in does not have a cardiac cath unit, so I paid for the ambulance, because Medicare wouldn't pay for it, to transfer him from North Las Vegas to Sunrise Hospital. And 3 days later, he was in a very good rehab facility. When he left that rehab facility, 6 weeks later, he could walk about 30 to 50 feet with a walker with help. When he got to subacute rehab, they wouldn't work with him because he was difficult. He would hit, he would yell, he would curse. He was there for 6 weeks, and then he was in a group home. At the group home, same thing. Very bad attitude, hit, kicked, yelled, wouldn't sleep through the night. He was in the group home for 14 months, and when the nurse who was in charge of the group home told me that what they wanted to do was increase his medication, I took him home. I was very fortunate. It took me 2 days to figure out that I could not take care of him by myself. Now, some people in this room have known me quite a while, some have not. I am not a caregiver. I am not a nurturing person. I have dogs, not children. I love my dogs, but you don't have to send them to college, and they don't argue with you. And I have been a lawyer since 1980. That's who I am. I'm left-brained, I'm very analytical. I'm good at that. I am not warm and fuzzy. So I reached out to friends and found a woman who moved into our casita, and she is still with us 2 years later. But when Tom came home, he could not walk. He still cannot walk. He is in a hospital bed or in a wheelchair 24/7. And the reason I'm telling you all this story is that not only is he deficient in short-term memory, but one of the things that the stroke has done and the dementia has done is erased many of his social controls. In the old, Tom's always had a foul mouth, he's a musician.
Hey.
A jazz musician, honey.
Hey.
So, and I apologize for my language in advance, but it is extraordinarily difficult to look at someone that you've loved and been with for 20-some years when he starts screaming that you're a cunt and a bitch and a whore. If he were in his right mind, would he call me those names? Of course he wouldn't. I mean, Lord knows we fought over the years. I'm Irish and he's Scot, and we, you know. But to deal with someone who kind of looks like the person you married, but who has no controls. He curses, he hits, he slaps, he wakes up in the middle of the night screaming, "Help me." I live in a Sun City community. We have security patrols. I've had them stop by a number of times because they can hear him from our houses on the corner. They can hear him from the street, screaming in the middle of the night or in the afternoon. It's extraordinarily difficult to get him into the car. I can't lift him by myself. His caregiver can. I don't know how she does it. He outweighs her by about 35 pounds, and she's barely 5 feet tall. But what I want you all to be aware of is what's going on as we age. I look around this room, and I suspect most of you are over 50. Either that or you've been dyeing your hair gray for some unknown reason. One of the things I discovered, and it's the reason that I get out of town at least once every 2 months, I'm told by my friends who have children that this happens when you have a baby. You don't sleep the same way anymore. There's some part of your brain that listens for the child in the middle of the night. I never sleep through the night when I'm at home anymore. I always wake up at least once, sometimes more than once, and always when he starts yelling. I have invested in many pairs of earplugs because on the advice of his doctor, I go into his room, make sure there's nothing wrong, and if he doesn't shut up within 15 to 20 minutes, I put in earplugs so I can go back to sleep. I tried for 2 years to keep my practice going. I'm in the process of winding it down because I cannot focus. And this is what leads to elder abuse. Not only abuse by patients against their caregivers, but by caregivers against the patients, because you get so frustrated that the person you're talking to doesn't understand what you're saying. And for our churches, and Catherine Tang and I, when we were talking about this, she said, "What did you learn from this?" I said, "I learned that I am one of the luckiest people in the world because of my friends. Because of the support group I have from church, because of the support group that I have from Sir Optimist. And I have friends who are warm and fuzzy, and they help me, and they help my husband because they visit. Most of them once every month, once every 6 weeks. He can carry on a conversation and track it for about 20 minutes, and then he gets bored. He can't read anymore. He watches television, and he cannot play the piano because the left side of his body is seriously affected. His left hand is almost always just like this. And his left leg has kind of spontaneous automatic movements, but he really can't. He has to consciously think to move his left side. And he cannot see out of the left side of both of his eyes. So he's not blind in one eye. He has half vision. So if you're standing on the left side of the bed, he can't see you. You have to go over to the right side of the bed. Or holler at him to turn his head. So those are the things that I personally am dealing with, and I suspect a number of you are dealing with some of the same things. And we are invisible. I told Billy yesterday, we all understand what a terrible scourge child abuse is. And we see the children and we have structures in place to help them. And we've gotten past the why doesn't she leave notion of domestic violence against women, and we now have structures and plans and ways to deal with that kind of violence. Elder abuse is a completely different animal. First, most of the victims of elder abuse are not visible. They don't go shopping. They don't come to church very often. Their spouses or caregivers may bring them occasionally, but those are the people that, oh, I haven't seen Mary lately. I wonder what's going on. And then you don't think about it and you don't call. One of Tom's friends, who was a very good friend, called last week for the first time in almost 2 years. One of his daughters does not interact with us at all. The last time I heard from her was 2 years ago. And her comment to her sister, when her sister asked why she didn't at least call, I can't handle it. And she's 50. So part of my message is to pay attention to the people around you in your church, in your other social activities, and watch what's going on. Now, there's another huge piece that's financial abuse, and that is a completely different story. One of the things I've discovered over the years in working with families and guardianships is when the kids come in and want to take over, and they tell you it's not about the money, they just want to make sure that dad is well taken care of, it's always about the money. If there's no money, they don't care, and you won't see them. So that's a different piece. But the physical piece is very often not nearly as visible. Again, you don't see people, and you don't see them with bruises on their faces or broken arms. What you see is someone who gets sent to the hospital repeatedly with bed sores or with scratches or losing weight because they're not getting enough to eat. All of those little signs that tell you that someone is neglecting this person. And sometimes it's not conscious. For those of us who are in our 60s and a little bit younger, who still have our parents, we're busy. How many of you, if suddenly you were completely incapacitated and had to be fed, bathed, toileted, all of those things, have someone in your family that you know could step in and do that for you? Not many. We used to be a society where families stayed in the same area. I remember the first time I went to France, and one of the guides told us that in rural France, most family members don't move more than 75 miles away from where they were born. That doesn't happen in this country anymore. My husband's children, one is in Phoenix, one is in Issaquah, Washington. And they have families and jobs and responsibilities. Neither one of them, even if they wanted to, could drop everything and take care of him. I couldn't drop everything and take care of him. I was not physically able to do it, and I was not financially able to do it because I would have had to completely quit work. So you need to start looking at the people around you and figuring out ways not only to support those who are ill, but their caregivers. There are programs available. For those of you who are from Nevada, the Lou Ruvo Brain Center and Cleveland Clinic is a magnificent resource. They have caregiver classes, they have lunch and learn programs, they have an astonishing Alzheimer's library, and it's all free. There are state agencies on aging that can put you in contact with resources, and I'm sure Ted will talk about some of that. The system is designed to provide medical insurance for anyone over 65. How many of you understand your explanation of benefits when you get them? How many of you even look at them? 2? I do.
Because I did medical transcription.
Uh-huh. And it's a problem. So there are avenues in your churches to put together groups of people who are dealing with these problems and get them some help. Because a lot of the abuse happens because people get so frustrated and so tired. I mean, just bone tired. And that's what leads them to not be able to cope. They're just exhausted. And for families that have no ability to pay for a caregiver, it's a serious problem. Full-time in-home care, if you have people coming in 24/7 in Las Vegas, costs between $8,000 and $10,000 a month. Nursing home care is around $6,500 to $8,500 a month, depending on where you are. And most of us, when we were in our 20s and 30s, didn't plan for that. So we have to put in place structures in our social groups, and churches are the best place to start for that, to help those people, and typically it's women, although sometimes it's men, but typically it's women because we outlive them, to help us cope with the kinds of stress that cause the breakdown of bonds of common courtesy, if nothing else. Like I say, it is all I can do sometimes not to scream at Tom. About 6 weeks ago, he hit me in the face with his fist. I have a temporary crown right here because the crown that was there, the tooth underneath cracked. And about a week and a half ago, I lost the tooth. My dentist, fortunately, is a nice man, and he's taking monthly payments on my $1,500 new crown. But the tooth underneath didn't have a post, and it just cracked. I've learned now to stay out of Tom's way, because for months I had bruises on my side, on my arms, on my legs, because he reflexively kicks and hits and doesn't remember. And I think that's the hardest thing. And those of you who have had to deal with these kind of situations, I suspect know what I'm talking about. They don't remember. Once the flash of anger is over, it's gone. You know, when you look at movies and you see some crazed killer and they look, you can tell from their eyes they're a crazed killer. My husband looks like that sometimes. He gets so angry and he simply lashes out. And it's hard. The person that I'm dealing with now is not the person I married. And I knew when I married him, he's 14 years older than I am, something's going to happen. I didn't expect this. So my advice to all of you is just be aware of what's going on with your friends and your friends' families. And even if you can't help, listen to them. I have two friends we go to lunch about every 6 weeks. And it's my I need to scream lunch. Because Tom's caregiver, while she is a magnificent caregiver, talks constantly and repeats herself and repeats herself and repeats herself, and she's very passive aggressive, and she drives me crazy. But my husband in 3.5 years has never had a single bed sore. He's diabetic, his sugar is completely under control. She monitors his food, she checks his blood sugar, she gives him his meds. She will not allow me to bring someone in so she can take a vacation, because she's terrified that they'll hurt him. So there are saints out there, and I choose to believe that God sent Terry to me because of this situation. But because elder abuse is such a hidden problem, I felt like I needed to tell you what's going on in my life. And I suspect some of the same things are going on in your lives or in the lives of your friends or other family members. So, thank you.